We're seeing a growing trend with a lot of religious leaders, especially evangelical leaders, who are beginning to strongly push for the cause of vaccination for COVID-19. Now, disclaimer, if you want to get a COVID-19 shot, that is your choice. I'm not going to try to persuade you one way or the other. That being said, you have to ask yourself the question, why are so many religious leaders and religious organizations coming out in favor of pushing this vaccine on people, despite the fact that some people's conscience may not allow them to do so? All right, so you see a lot of people right now, particularly among conservative Christians, who are skeptical about the vaccine, don't want to get the vaccine. They're concerned about the ingredients in the vaccine and perhaps the fetal tissue that has been exposed as being used in these vaccines. And we don't know much about the ingredients in these vaccines. Some people just don't want to do it. Some people, it is against their conscience to do it. Yet conservative, religious leaders like the Gospel Coalition and the Southern Baptist Convention are heavily pushing the vaccine. And you have to ask yourself why. Why are they doing this? So John Piper put out an article today. Let me pull that up. He says a reason to be vaccinated, and he argues that the reason to be vaccinated is freedom. All right, so in this article here, he argues the people I have especially in view are those who are not vaccinated because of fear of being out of step with people they respect and in step with people they don't admire. His message to those people, he says, you are free. So he's arguing here, it sounds like, that some people choose not to be vaccinated because they're being pressured not to be vaccinated within whatever circles of people they run with. I don't know exactly who he's talking about, but it kind of sounds like he may be hinting towards conservative leaders or alternative news media outlets, or, perhaps to a certain extent, even other more conservative religious leaders than himself. Okay, so it sounds like what he's arguing is that, well, you don't have to follow those people. You can choose to get the vaccine if you want to. Now, first of all, there's way, way more pressure to be vaccinated than there is to not be vaccinated. You have, like I said, people losing their jobs, churches not allowing people to come in and worship without a vaccine passport, or, the face mask, the whole thing. It's, for some people, they don't want to do it because they understand that once you give the government that kind of power to coerce you into a medical procedure, that there's no limit. So I put an article out today at reformationcharlotte.org arguing that exact thing, that once you give the power to the government to coerce you into a medical procedure, there's not going to be any limit. What at that point is going to stop them from coercing you into having an abortion? Women, particularly. They can put the pressure on the men too, no doubt about that. But women, especially women in the workforce, what's going to stop them from forcing you to have an abortion? Because let's just be real. The leftists that run this country have long held that abortion is women's health care. They have been grooming the population to believe that abortion is health care since Roe v. Wade. Now, of course, Christians don't actually believe that, but what ground do we have to stand on to argue if they're the ones in power? They're the ones that are making the call. So once we give them the power to force us to take a vaccine, we're giving them the same power to force us to have an abortion, to force us into any other medical procedure they see fit, and at some point to force us to euthanize our elderly because they find them to be a drain on the population. Now, in that article, I pointed out that Nancy Pelosi argued several years ago that the reason she supports Planned Parenthood is because contraception, that's what she calls it, abortion, and she calls contraception. Contraception actually helps reduce the strain on government welfare programs. So she's basically arguing that, well, we need to abort as many children as we possibly can because all these children are having a financial strain on our government welfare programs. So let's just kill them and get them out of the way. And what's going to stop them from forcing euthanasia on your elderly parents or forcing euthanasia on your children who may be disabled of some form and are unable to fully function in society? All right, so there's no end to this, and some people recognize that. I mean, I certainly recognize that. My vaccine status is nobody's business, but I'm certainly not going to cave into the medical tyranny that's being pushed on us by the government, and you shouldn't either. So again, this back to John Piper. Why is he pushing so hard? And why is the Gospel Coalition pushing so hard to advance the cause of vaccines? Okay, the ERLC brought up this article here several weeks ago, how Christians should think about religious exemptions for vaccinations. And they argued that essentially nobody should have a sincerely held religious belief against vaccines, that there really aren't any in biblical Christianity. And that really the only people who may have a legitimate exemption would be someone like the Jehovah's Witnesses. All right, so these are the people that are going to be. They're the ones that are going to be handing you over to the tyrants. They're the ones that are going to be. All right, so John Piper. Back to John Piper for a minute. John Piper lies in this article, and he spits out this talking point here that nearly all COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. are now in people who weren't vaccinated. All right, so this article came out today. We already know that figure has been debunked, thoroughly debunked, and that number, according to former CDC director, is actually far more closer to 40%. 40% of people who died in Maryland, but it's also, elsewhere, were fully vaccinated, the former CDC director says. Now, this is not just some fly-by-night crazy person. I mean, this is the guy who formerly led the Centers for Disease Control. All right. So he comes out and says 40% of these people who died of COVID were fully vaccinated. So then again, why is John Piper arguing these statistics that have been debunked in order to advance this vaccine agenda? And I'm going to submit to you that the reason that they're doing this isn't because they actually care about you. It isn't because they actually care about people. It isn't because they're loving their neighbor. Let's just be real. That's ridiculously stupid. It isn't because people are made in the image of God. It's not because it's a gospel issue. All the other talking points that the Gospel Coalition and Russell Moore and the ERLC have all come up with over the years to try to groom people into following their agenda has nothing to do with that. The reason they're pushing this agenda is because they want to preserve their spot. They think it's going to help them preserve their spot in society when tyranny comes, and they know that it's coming. So they want to be on what they think is the winning side of this. And they think that by pushing all the rest of us under the bus, everybody else who's actually willing to stand up and fight, by pushing you under the bus, they think that they're saving their own butt. That's what this is about. That's it. There's nothing else about it. Because when tyranny comes and they say, all of these conservative Christians stood up against this, it's time to take them out, they can point back and say, no, see that article that I wrote over at Desiring God? Or see that ridiculous article I wrote over at the Gospel Coalition or the ERLC? They can point back at that and say, no, I was on your side. But guess what? They're not going to care. They are not going to care. And if you think they're not going to come for you, John Piper, if you think they're not going to come for you, Russell Moore, they're going to come for all of you. Unless you renounce Christ altogether. That's how it works. Do you remember what happened in Rome? Do you remember what happened to the Protestant martyrs who went up against the Roman Catholic tyranny? The tyrant of a pope. Do you remember what happened? Do you remember what happened to Martin Luther? And while this may not be particularly the same kind of a thing, they're going to associate it with Christianity. And Christianity is their ultimate target. Christianity is not just people who want freedom that they're after. They want to silence the church, and they're going to do whatever they can. They're going to take people out as much as they possibly can. You already see it happening. They're pushing people out of their jobs, out of their homes, out of grocery stores all over the world. It's coming to America. It's coming. It's coming, folks. And if you don't stand up now, it's not about the vaccine. I don't care about the vaccine, but if you don't stand up to tyranny now, they're going to take you, they're going to take your children, and they are going to kill us. They're going to kill us because they want to kill Christ. Every communist, socialist society in the history of the world has followed the same trajectory. Russia, China, North Korea, Cuba, name it, all of them. Christ and the church is, barring a very small remnant, is almost non-existent in these nations. That's the nature of it. It could be we're going to go through some tough times, and I don't know what's going to happen. I can't predict what's going to happen. I can't predict if we're going to win or not. From a practical perspective, of course, Christ has already won at the cross, but we're going to go through some really, really hard times, and I hope everybody's prepared. You better tell everybody, warn people, because this is not about the vaccine. This is about the gospel. This is about the gospel. The vaccine is just testing grounds. They want to see who's willing to cave, who's going to fight back, who's going to stand up. Pick your hill to die on. It better be the gospel. Have a good night.